Hello everyone. We're taking a look at another section in Hand and Killer7. The section we're looking at is the Factions section. It's not a long section, not nearly as long as the Character section, which is probably the single longest section in this whole book. The Factions section is much smaller in comparison and does not have the pretty illustrations that we were looking at. Rather, it looks more like this. Looks more like just pages with text on them, Japanese text, but it's going to tell us about a few of the different groups that are working with and against each other in the world of Killer7, some of the political organizations, and maybe it'll shed a little bit of light on some of the things that we have not been getting that much information on. As is the case with Hand and Killer7, it tells us a few new things here and there. And then a lot of the things we kind of already knew. It's kind of how this book seems to go. So, let's take a look at that first section. What is our first faction? The United Nations Party. Let's read what it has to say about that. After the Second World War, the United Nations Party was founded by former members of the Liberal Party. Since its establishment, it has become Japan's leading political party. Toru Fukushima is the party's leader. He is a former member of the Liberal Party. Some members of the party are older men, like Hirayasu Kurahashi and Shinya Akiba. The party also includes younger people whose leader within the party is Kenjiro Matsuoka. When Fukushima was killed, the party briefly fell into chaos. Fukushima was supposed to attend the Japanese-US meeting in the Kaku building. In his place, the Liberal Party sent its members. Negotiations between the Liberal Party and the US government had concluded well before the meeting in the Kaku building, so the meeting was intended to be a mere formality. Unexpectedly, the US government broke off negotiations. As a result, both sides ended up killing each other. So, we kind of already knew a whole bunch of this. The UN party, the majority party in Japan, at the time that Killer7 is happening, Toru Fukushima is the leader. Their goal basically is Japanese independence, like they want to be kind of on their own and not under the umbrella of the United States, which is why Mills says at the beginning of Sunset that Japan has turned against them. It's why the US, even though, they're Japan's ally, they're not going to fire the fireworks because maybe Japan has outlived its usefulness to the US. But with Fukushima killed by an assassin, Julia, sent by the Liberal Party, they take control with negotiations with the US over whether or not the fireworks will be launched. However, even though the Liberal Party does want to they want to continue to have their current relationship with the US has decided that it's not going to happen and that the fireworks are going to fall anyway. It's talking about the negotiations in the Kaku building, the Mahjong game. It's going to say that the Mahjong game in the Kaku building were the negotiations between the U.S. representatives and the Liberal Party, and that the ending of that game is the U.S. government breaking off negotiations, so both sides kill each other. I mean, I guess that's the explanation that we're going to go with, because it's not like the game really makes it especially clear as what is going on in that Mahjong game, so we'll go with this. It does mention that the younger people in the UN party look up to Matsuoka as their leader, and yeah, we know about that, Matsuoka being the only living UN party leader by the end of the game. He's the guy who has all the power when it comes to these Japanese nationals, and he is the main player when it comes to representing Japan by the end of the game, which is why we have that choice whether or not we're going to kill him, and by killing him or not killing him, we affect the path of what Japan, or what the country formerly known as Japan and the people formerly known as the Japanese are going to be doing when it comes to the scene of international politics, is the idea. But United Nations Party, we already had a good idea of what they were all about. Next up is the Liberal Party. A bit more information about them. The Liberal Party is the second most powerful political party in Japan. Ota and Kuramoto, the men who attended negotiations in the Kaku building, are members of the Liberal Party, and Hiro Kasai works as an informant for the Liberal Party. Intent on destroying the UN Party, the Liberal Party wants to reclaim its lost place as the forerunning political party in Japan. The Liberal Party desired an extension of the Asian Security Treaty, and therefore kept its relationship with the US government in good condition. Oppositely, Toru Fukushima completely severed his relationship with the US government. He ended the Security Treaty in the interest of establishing Japan as a truly independent state. When the Liberal Party learned about Fukushima's annulment of the Asian Security Treaty, it sent Julia Kisugi to assassinate him. As well, Kisugi was instructed to retrieve the Yakumo. The Liberal Party wanted to reclaim control of the Japanese government to protect the Japanese people's interests. It regarded Fukushima's action as reckless. Since the Liberal Party desired a more complex relationship of support with the United States, it was only natural that they should try to assassinate the leader of their Japanese competition. Only natural. Kasai asked the Killer7 to eliminate Jean de Paul. He wanted the Japan-US government meeting in the Kaku building to succeed in order to strengthen the security treaty. Fukushima, however, had known for years that the US government was plotting against Japan. He took his anti-US position in preparation. So it seems from what this is saying, the Liberal Party, including Hiro Kasai, are kind of behind the curve. They don't really know what's going on. And the one who did know what was going on was Fukushima, who knew what the US government was eventually going to do, and that was the impetus of his anti-US position. That's why he wanted Japanese independence. He wanted to be out from underneath the US umbrella because he knew that eventually Japan was going to be carved up by other nations. So really Fukushima was the one who was ahead of the curve, ahead of everyone else. I think everything here, again, we pretty much knew. I don't think there's essentially anything that's really all that different from the information that we had already received in the game. I guess the bit about Kasai wanting Jean de Paul to be killed so the Japan-US government meeting in the Kaku building would succeed, I guess that part is a little bit new. I mean, we never really knew what those negotiations in the Kaku building were, like what that Mahjong scene was really all about, but it seems that Kasai was hoping that if DePaul was killed and that he was not able to interfere in those negotiations, that they would be successful. What Kasai was not aware of was that the outcome of those negotiations were already known. Even Travis told us, when we were in the Kaku building, that there was no point to continuing the negotiations, that they were a charade, that the representatives from the US sent to the negotiations were expendable, and the character section in Hand and Killer7 said this as well, that the US already knew what the result of these negotiations were going to be, and there really was no point in continuing it. So it seems that Kasai and the Liberal Party perhaps were not aware of that themselves. So, from the beginning, it seems that Japan was doomed, and it seems like possibly the only thing that could have stopped that from happening was if Fukushima was left alive, if he was able to go to the Kaku building, and if he was able to try to conduct the negotiations with the possibility of offering the US the Yakumo. Travis did say that that was something that Fukushima could offer them in order to incentivize the US to launch the fireworks. So, essentially, by killing Fukushima, the Liberal Party doomed Japan, even though they thought they were trying to save it. Next up, the United States of America. Since the foundation of the United States of America, many organizations and political parties struggled for power. Although history recognizes that the United States of America's government as a democratic republic, it is rumored that a shadow government really runs the country. Oh my, a shadow government. Well, we find out at the end of Killer7 that the U.S. is not actually a democratic republic. We find out that basically the way elections work is the elections are controlled by the Secretary of Education, because most polling stations in the U.S. are in schools, and the Secretary of Education has absolute control over the schools. So whichever candidate bribes the Secretary of Education more, the Secretary of Education will then manipulate the poll results from the schools and thus decide who the new president is going to be. So that's how it turns out. I mean, there's several problems with that, and I'm not going to say that Suda 51. I'm not going to expect that he will have a great knowledge of how the U.S. government works, and I don't have a great knowledge of how the Japanese government works. I'm not going to say that maybe Suda should have figured out what the holes in this plan are. But hey, I'm sure if you go onto YouTube and if you search for it, I'm sure you will see plenty of people who will be too eager to tell you about all the ways that a shadow government really runs the U.S. I don't know if this particular idea will be one of the ideas, that the Secretary of Education is actually the most powerful person in the country. It might be. I mean, you never know. That might be an idea that comes up. That's the United States of America. What's next? The U.S. government. The U.S. government's cold attitude toward Japan resulted in a rupture in its relationship toward Fukushima. The Killer7 receives its missions from the U.S. government through Christopher Mills. Jefferson Dudley, the U.S. representatives at the meeting in the Kaku building, were sent to the meeting in order to break off negotiations with Japan. They were expendable pawns who were sent to end the negotiations by killing the Japanese representatives and being killed themselves. As a result, Japan was thrown into total chaos. Some wondered whether Japan's disorder was the president and the U.S. government's intention from the start. However, the president's delay in response was due to the prolonged settlement on the distribution of Japan's land and natural resources with European countries. The true test of Japan's value for the U.S. government was nothing more than determining what benefit the U.S. would receive from Japan's destruction. If the U.S. had received fewer concessions and benefits from Japan's destruction, the fireworks are likely to have been launched. So, first of all, it does mention that Jefferson Dudley, who were sent to the meeting at the Kaku building, were supposed to kill the Japanese representatives. I don't know why they played Mahjong with them first. If they were going to kill them the whole time, why bother? I don't know. Maybe it was just polite. Who could say? But an interesting thing it does mention here is that the reason that it took so long for the U.S. to decide whether or not they would launch the fireworks is because they were seeing what could they get from Japan if they launched the fireworks. Would they be able to get enough from Japan that would make it worth their while? That's what they were trying to see. Mills does tell Garcine at the beginning of that mission that this is the test for Japan's true worth, I believe is what he says. It seems like an odd line, but according to this page right here, what that is supposed to mean, what the test is what can the U.S. get out of saving Japan? Will they get enough to make it worth their while, or will they just let Japan be destroyed and carve it up with the rest of the world? So that was the idea. And it could possibly be the case that the only thing that would have incentivized the U.S. to save Japan would have been to be given the Yakumo. Of course, that was not going to happen after Fukushima was killed and DePaul stole it. Next is the U.S. Opposition Party. Behind the scenes, the U.S. Opposition Party is connected with Kunlan's East. It tries to help him crush the United States. The U.S. Opposition Party controls the U.S. Immigration Bureau. So, I'm trying to remember if we ever hear the term U.S. Opposition Party in the game. I don't really remember it. But apparently, there is a force, a party in the U.S. that wants to bring the country down. They align themselves with Kunlan. They say that they control the U.S. Immigration Bureau. Not a whole lot of details here. how does an organization that wants to destroy the U.S. have control over the U.S. Immigration Bureau? Not really any explanation on that. Not really any explanation on that. I would also assume that maybe this has something to do with Coburn Elementary School in Seattle, in Washington State. We did hear in Holbert's report that the school is being controlled by an organization that wants to bring down the U.S., and that they are training the kids there to be Yakumo party members. So that always seemed kind of strange that there was a school in the U.S. that was training kids to be anti-U.S. operatives. Maybe this has to do with the opposition party, but I don't really remember this coming up, this particular name coming up in the game itself. Next page. 4 more entries to read. The first, the International Ethics Committee. Okay, so this is something that we do hear in the game. We do hear this name given. This is who Jean de Paul works for. The International Ethics Committee, IEC, is a peacekeeping organization that mediates an international conflict. The IEC intended to make the United States attack Japan. It sent Jean de Paul to Restaurant Fukushima with orders to eliminate Kasugi to destroy Japan's Liberal Party. If Fukushima was allowed to live, Japan's isolation would be maintained. The rationale behind sending de Paul to the Kaku building was similar, to break off the negotiation by killing members of Japan's Liberal Party, who wanted to extend the security treaty. However, de Paul encountered Masked Smith before he reached the meeting room. De Paul's mission failed. His life was wasted, since the IEC's desires were fulfilled without the need for their intervention. The next objective of the International Ethics Committee is to colonize Japan with Russian and Asian populations. They have already occupied Hokkaido and Kyushu. Now they are arguing over concession of Honshu with the United States. In Singapore, the negotiations regarding the division of Japan continue. So, this is something that we hear in Chapter 2. I believe Travis mentions the International Ethics Committee and that they sent Jean de Paul, but we never really know anything about them. So a little bit of information here. They're in this international organization. They mediate an international conflict, and it says they're a peacekeeping organization. Peacekeeping, I'm going to say, probably a broad definition of that, considering that they are trying to make the United States attack Japan. So, very broad definition of what it means to keep peace. It says that they sent de Paul to kill Kasugi, and they wanted to do that so Fukushima would stay in power, and as such, he would continue to push for Japanese isolation from the U.S. And I guess he also was sent to steal the Yakumo, so Fukushima would not be able to give it to the U.S., so they would have nothing to offer the U.S. in exchange for the fireworks, is I guess what's happening here. And it says that he was indeed sent to the Kaku building to kill the negotiators between Japan and the U.S., which is what happens in the comic. In the game, it's a little unclear because, well, the negotiators kill each other. So it seems kind of odd, but it turns out that if we had not killed de Paul, that's what he would have done. He would have killed them, and the outcome would not have changed at all. It would have been exactly the same, since the negotiators just kill each other anyway. So, there was absolutely no reason for Jean de Paul to go to the building. There was no reason actually for us to kill him. The outcome would not have changed at all. So why is the International Ethics Committee doing this? Well, their goal is to carve up Japan and to colonize it with Russian and Asian populations. Who are they, anyway, this committee? Well, it says that they're arguing with the United States over Honshu, so they're not part of the United States. I guess they're some sort of multinational, international group? I don't know. I don't know who they represent. But whoever they represent, they have interests in terms of, right now, colonizing Japan with other populations. And it looks like that they are at odds with the United States in terms of carving up Japan. So, Who exactly do they represent and what their interests are still are kind of a mystery. They're not the US, they're not any one country, but it does seem like it does mention that perhaps they're arguing in the interests of Russia and other Asian nations. So that's all we find out about the International Ethics Committee. Next up is the Yakumo Cabinet Policy. Okay, so a very important thing that we hear about in the game a few times. The Yakumo Cabinet Policy was created in 1953. It was the work of the group known as the Union 7, who were young members of the Liberal Party. The Yakumo Cabinet Policy, called Yakumo for short, addressed such subjects as the ideal nation, foreign policy, and other matters of nationalism and diplomacy. The policy was given to the Liberal Party's chief secretary, after which it disappeared. The Union 7 was forced to disband, owing to internal conflict within the Liberal Party. Julia Kasugi was hired by the Liberal Party and sent to the United States to retrieve the Yakumo. She was hired as a secretary by Toru Fukushima, who she later killed. However, the Yakumo had been taken by Jean de Paul, a spy from the International Ethics Committee, who had taken work in Fukushima's restaurant as an apprentice to the head chef. The whereabouts of the Yakumo were unknown after that. However, it was rumored that a young mail clerk in a small Texan town named Andre Olmeda had found part of the Yakumo. Somehow, Olmeda established a company called First Life. As his company grew, he employed most of the town's residents. First Life developed the town, and became much more than a simple business. Most of this we already know. The Yakumo is this some kind of divinely inspired document that was written by the Union 7, a group of young politicians which included Fukushima. Everyone wants it, and Kasugi was supposed to get it. She was not able to get it. DePaul got it. She stole it. Jean DePaul, Julia did not steal it. Jean DePaul stole it for the International Ethics Committee. So the weird thing is, what happens after that? We don't know. We don't know where Jean DePaul took it to. However, Andre Olmeda finds part of it while working in the post office in Intercity, Texas. How did part of the Yakumo get from Jean DePaul to Olmeda? We really don't know. I mean, there's nothing here that says anything about that. Somehow he gets it, though, and by getting it, he is able to create First Life, and he is able to create his own perfect society and become this extraordinary human being who is able to... Well, he's able to inject himself with deadly diseases, and his body simply overcomes the diseases by sheer strength of will. And he creates medicine from his body by doing this. So the Yakumo is able to turn normal people into extraordinary people, like Olmeda. Unfortunately, we never actually see the Yakumo itself, and we don't really have a good idea of how it traveled around after it was stolen from Fukushima by DePaul. So, aside from that, I don't think there's any other new information here that we already did not know about the Yakumo. Next up is the Asian Security Protocol. One of the primary causes of international conflict is the limited number of energy resources, in conjunction with different economic systems and environmental concerns. In 1975, in Hakone, Japan, an international conference met to find solutions to energy security problems, specifically as they related to Asian countries. The Hakone Protocol contained 3 different possible routes. 1. The Pipe Plan. This plan was advantageous to oil-producing countries in the Middle East. 2. The Civic Plan. This plan was advantageous for China and its allied countries, all of whom had high dependency on coal. 3. The Massive Plan. This plan was advantageous for the United States and Europe, who desired oil concessions from the Middle East. One of these 3 plans were adopted by the countries who attended and voted during the international conference. However, there was no formal announcement regarding which of the 3 plans was selected. So this is mentioned in one of the reports that we've been seeing at the end of these videos, where it turns out that Harmon Smith was hired to find out which of these plans was going to win the vote. He somehow does figure it out, and for whatever reason, the announcement of which plan won is never given. We never find out which of these plans was the one that was voted on, and in fact, the world in general in Killer7 never finds out, which is weird. I don't know why that is. Also, another weird thing is that if you go back to that report that talks about Harmon finding out which one was going to win, there's a fourth plan. Like, there's 3 plans here, but that report that we saw had 4. And I don't know why there's a difference here. Is that deliberate? Like, is it supposed to be the case that there is a 4th mystery plan? Or was that just a discrepancy, when this story was being written up in different time periods? Maybe that was just a mistake. Maybe originally there were only 3 plans, but when the JACO reports were written, they had a 4th plan. I don't know if that's deliberate or if that's just accidental. But in that report, there was a 4th plan mentioned, and we know that Harmon knows what the outcome of this vote was, but no one else does. I also could not say how this is relevant to the game in general. We see this in the supplemental materials, but not actually mentioned in the game itself, or really I don't know why this is mentioned, but it's here. Next up is fireworks, something we do know about. In 2003, the United Nations Army intervened on international conflicts and brought true peace to the entire world for people of all races. The United Nations declared world peace. Global disarmament commenced. All members of the United Nations signed a formal agreement dedicating their countries to a total abolition of weapons of mass destruction. The agreement stipulated that the disposal of the weapons of mass destruction must occur within plain view of the entire world's population. This meant that undersea or underground detonations were not allowed. The United Nations decided that the missiles should be launched outside the Earth's atmosphere, then intercepted by other missiles, thereby exploding all missiles at once. These explosions lit up the night sky. Because of their resemblance, these explosions were called fireworks. They were the most anticipated event in the history of the world. The International Photographic Mapping Office transmitted photographs of these explosions all over the world so that anyone who missed the explosions could see proof. In April 2005, the fireworks took place in the sky above Ibiza Island. The sky over Japan was chosen also as a point of detonation. This is how history records the events. However, in reality, the peace for people of all races was imposed by the United Nations Army, and the World Peace Declaration was superficial. Oppositely, racial tensions increased under pressure from the United Nations. So, something that I don't think comes as much of a surprise is that the world peace that has been instituted is something of a sham. It's sort of a charade. Of course, there is world peace for the countries that benefit from it, and of course there will be a number of countries and peoples that will not benefit from it so much, but they're being told that, hey, this is the world order now, this is the status quo, we have world peace, so we're not fighting over anything anymore, and, you just came out on the bottom of that. And that is what leads to things like, the heaven smiles, as Kunlan decides that he does not like the world order. He wants the status quo to flip, so the Asian nations of the world are the ones who are in power, which is what, of course, it leads him to create the heaven smiles, who will then perform terroristic actions. So, of course, even though the United Nations declared world peace, it could not be a true world peace. It was just basically world peace for the nations that were going to benefit from it. And now we move on to the last page of the factions section. Only 2 entries here. The first is the International Mass Scale Transportation System, something we hear about at the beginning of the game. Never really comes up as we play through the game, though. Ahem. The United Nations feared that it could no longer control the international market, owing to the hastened development of means of distribution of materials. Therefore, it enacted greater restrictions on the air transportation industry. Additionally, research institutes reported that an unknown virus was transported via airplanes. This virus had the potential to spark a global epidemic. A decline in the use of airlines was inevitable. In order to replace air transportation, a network of intercontinental expressways was planned for construction. After the construction of the intercontinental expressways, a next-generation distribution system was slated for construction, using the intercontinental expressways as their foundation. For its successful operation, a newly discovered power source would be used to move a gigantic metal plate across the sea floor. The plate would have a base area of several kilometers. This next-generation distribution system was called the Intercontinental Mass-Scale Transportation System. Construction of the new transportation system began in 2003. By 2005, 40% of the project had been completed. As of the events of Killer7, construction continues. Many politicians became rich from under-the-table concessions granted to private corporations who supplied materials for the large-scale construction. As of 2005, the project had concluded its experimental phase. It was proven workable. However, nations still struggle between each other over concessions promised at the beginning of the project regarding the maintenance of the infrastructure. So, we remember at the beginning of the game, in that animated cutscene, we see that all air travel has been banned. And it does mention here that in the first paragraph, the United Nations feared that it can no longer control the international market owing to the hastened development of means of distribution of materials. Therefore, it enacted greater restrictions on the air transportation industry. The implication being that air travel was not banned for terrorist reasons solely, but mostly was because the United Nations thought that they were losing control of the market. So banning air travel was going to help them in that regards. So maybe it never had to do with keeping the world safe from terrorism. Maybe it was all just business in the end. It does mention that the International Mass-Scale Transportation System is supposed to be a big metal plate on the sea floor that is going to be moved across the ocean using a newly discovered power source, and I guess that's what's going to be used to transport things, like products and materials from one side of the ocean to the other, is I guess what this is about. It mentions that there is a newly discovered power source, and it said that in the game itself. And you'd think that would be pretty important. The idea that there's a new power source that had just been discovered at the bottom of the sea floor, and that seems like that would be something that's very important, just for the world in general. But they never say anything about it. In fact, this whole thing about the International Mass-Scale Transportation System and the Intercontinental Expressways really never come up that much in Killer 7. It really doesn't end up being that important of a part of the story. So let's move on to the last faction, Network. In 1996, the International Photographic Mapping Office was created as an organ of the United Nations. Initially, the office was supposed to sort and distribute aerial photographs for the United Nations Army. Several years later, however, the office was involved fully in controlling media and commercial images. In 1998, the private use of the internet was banned globally by the United Nations, under the influence of such organizations as Security Council, Economic and Social Council, and Human Rights Committee. Regulation on the uses of the internet was reinforced. The restrictions were established to help protect national secrets, as well as individual information, and to protect against cyber terrorism in the global market. As a result, analog devices replaced digital devices to support the networks and other media. However, even after 1998, a computer network still operates that supports hackers and devoted online gamers. Love Wilcox rose to celebrity status among the members of this underground subculture. And good timing on the music, as Love's theme is playing right now. This is talking a little bit about what happened to the internet. It was banned, as we know. It was restricted to protect against cyber terrorism. Analog devices replaced digital devices. But there is still one computer network somewhere that the online gamers are playing on, because of course you cannot stop the online gamers. They will game no matter what the government has to say. Love is a celebrity among the gamer subculture. And of course, she and a bunch of her fellow gamers play the Killer7 game. And by playing that, they became the Handsome Men. And they fight the Killer7 in the game itself? I'm still not entirely clear on that. One thing to notice, however, is that the International Photographic Mapping Office, at the beginning, it sounds like it's not very important. It's supposed to sort and distribute aerial photographs for the United Nations Army. However, it becomes very powerful over the years, eventually become fully controlling media and commercial images. So it is an office that does become much, much more important than it was when it was formed, though we never actually hear of it in the game itself, just like a whole lot of things in this book. A whole lot of things are mentioned that we never actually hear of in the game itself. Like, you think it would be a bit more important to talk about Love Wilcox, since she actually appears in the game. She's a character that we see in the game and we talk to. And like a lot of all this other stuff is not actually in the game. But there is a lot of text about it. So that's the last page about the faction section, but there is also one more spread that I wanted to show. It's not part of the faction section, but it seems like it's associated. Here we go with just like people and the people they're associated with. Like all the way on the left, you can see Garcian, and he's surrounded by his network of people. The Killer7, Harmon, Edo McAllister, we see Mills, we see the Bloody Heartland and Amir Park Reiner. So I guess this is just, I don't know what the Japanese say on this. I don't have a translation, but it just seems to be like an overview of characters in the game and the people who are within their personal networks. One thing that I'm kind of curious about is in the bottom middle of the left page, there is a network there with only 3 people, and those people are Dan, Kaede, and Coyote. And I'm kind of wondering, what is that network right there? Those 3 characters together? I mean, obviously, they're all part of the Killer7, but that's not what that network represents, clearly, because the Killer7, we can see them in the upper center of the left page. It's labeled as Killer7 in English. We see Harmon Smith, we see the Killer7, we see Amir Park Reiner, and the Bloody Heartland, but in that bottom middle of the left page, it's only Coyote, Kaede, and Dan, no one else. So what is that one supposed to represent? I'm not sure. To the left of it, we can see Kun Lan, and we can see next to him members of the UN party. But something that's also curious is that next to him is Andre Almeida. Now, I guess he's there because Almeida possessed part of the Yakumo, and I guess that is associated with Kun Lan. I would assume that's why they're connected, because in the game it did not seem like Andre Almeida was aware of Kun Lan, or he never mentioned him anyway. So I don't really know if there's more of a relationship there than is indicated. But a lot of these things are not really giving us that much information. One thing that's kind of interesting is in the left page, lower right, it shows Curtis Blackburn and his network of people. And it does show, to the left of Curtis, it does show the girl from the immigration office, and to the left of her is Ayami Blackburn. So maybe that does reinforce the idea that the girl from the immigration office is indeed Ayami Blackburn, since they're connected in that way on that little chart right there. Not sure what else we can really glean from this. It's just like a nice little piece of artwork, though, that I wanted to show. Not so much informative as it is, kind of nice to look at. have all these characters from the game arranged in this way. I don't really think there's much more in the way of information that we're going to get from this. Well, anyway, that's the faction section from hand in Killer7. Giving us just a little bit more information, a little bit more background flavor on the events of the game and the characters. Not really giving us that much more on what we already knew, because we did know a lot of this stuff already. But it is giving us just a little bit more information here and there, maybe filling in some gaps. Next time round, we're going to continue looking through Hand and Killer7. We're going to keep going through all these pages, and we're going to take a look, I believe, at a comic of a prototype of Killer7. It's not exactly not at all actually like the Western comic. We'll take a look at this short comic of prototype of Killer7 next time, and I'll see you then for that.